IELTS Academic Writing Task 1, Process Diagram. If you're lucky on test day, you will get a process rather than a graph or a pie chart. So let's have a look at one today. We're going to analyze the process diagram, review our method and structure, check the marking criteria, and I'll show you a sample as always. Here comes our task. It looks like this in the instructions. The diagram illustrates the process that is used to manufacture bricks for the building industry. Let's have a look. So as you can see, we've got a series of pictures here and arrows. This is usually the case. You have a starting point here. We've got a digger extracting clay from the ground, and the process moves like this until the final step, which is delivery. Now, the good thing about having a process in task 1 is a lot of the information is in there and a lot of the vocabulary is in there already as well. So a lot of the hard work is already done for you. We'll just quickly review our method. So remember that we start with analysing and planning for up to 3 minutes. When you write with the same structure in mind. We follow the same structure as we do for pie charts, tables, even when writing about a process. I'll show you how to do it. Keep the criteria in mind, 15 minutes for that, and 2 minutes to check and edit at the end. So let's look at our process in more detail. So this process shows how bricks are made, and obviously this is bricks down here. And we're going to start over with the digger and the clay. Then this material, this clay, goes into a metal grid across a roller. Sand and water are added. So there are lots of little bits of information along the way. And your job when you're writing about a process is to include everything. So unlike when we write about a bar chart or a line graph, when you're dealing with the process, you must not skip any stage or any detail. But the first thing I really want to look at is, where does the process start and end? So this information is going to be part of my overview. So we're obviously starting with the digger here and the clay, so the extraction of raw material. And where does it end? So here, once the bricks are made, they're packaged and they're off in a truck for delivery. So it starts here and finishes here. That's pretty simple. Also want to look at how many stages there are. This is just a matter of counting. Now, it's possible that you might consider one step to actually be 2 steps or 2 steps to be 1 step. It's not really all that important. You're just showing the examiner that you have looked in detail at this task, and it's a way to write an overview. So step 1 is here, step 2 is here. I'm going to consider all of this step 3, the addition of sand and water and the cutting. This is step 4, the drying oven. Step 5 is the heating and cooling. Step 6, the packaging, and step 7, the delivery. It's completely fine if you want to consider some of those steps as 2 separate entities. So when it comes to my structure, I'm going to have the introduction as always, the overview, where does it start and end, and how many steps. And then inside the key features, I look at a way to logically divide the process. So sometimes you might have a very clear distinction between stage 1 and stage 2. In this particular case, I'm going to divide probably along here. So the extraction and the making of the bricks, I'm going to consider all of that key features 1, body paragraph 1 really, and the rest of it will go from here, from when they're dried, cooked, packaged and delivered. I'll put all of that into 1 paragraph. Let's recap the structure. The introduction, we're going to say, what are you looking at? The overview, where does the process start and end? What are the key steps? And then key features 1, key features 2. As I said, remember, all of the information in the process diagram must be represented in your key features paragraphs. Even though we're not writing about a graph or a pie chart, the criteria is exactly the same. So you're still scored in the same way. So keep these things in mind: task achievement, coherence and cohesion, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy. This is the checklist that we always use. The only thing that's going to be different is up here, data. So obviously there are no numbers, no figures, so we don't need to include data when we're writing about a process. Here is a sample, and I'm going to read through it because it is a bit different to our normal samples. Let's start with the introduction up here, which is basically a rewording of the rubric. The process diagram shows how bricks are made from clay for the construction industry. Okay, very simple. The overview. Overall, the brickmaking process involves 7 steps, beginning with the extraction of raw material from the ground and finishing with the delivery of the finished bricks. So number of steps, where does it begin, where does it finish? You can follow that same system for any process diagram. Key features 1. First of all, clay is dug from the ground using a machine known as a digger. Notice here the passive voice. This is another feature of process diagram tasks. You're probably going to use a lot of passive voice, particularly one like this where you can't see any people involved. The passive voice is very important. It is then put through a metal grid, passive again. It is then put through a metal grid which sifts the large chunks from the pure clay. So this is here. Sand and water here are then added, and the mixture is either cut into bricks with wire, that's this one here, wire cutter, creating the shape, or put into a rectangular mold over here to achieve the final shape. So a lot of the vocab I'm taking directly from the process diagram, but I also need to embellish. I also need to add my own words and ideas around it. So that's key features 1. I've covered these first 3 steps there. Once the bricks have been formed, they are sent to a drying oven for 1 to 2 days before entering the heating stage. So from here, heating stage over here. Here they're heated in kilns, firstly at moderate temperatures, 200 to 980 degrees Celsius, and then at high temperatures of up to 1300 degrees. So I'm including this part here, the higher temperatures here. The cooked bricks are eventually moved into a cooling chamber here for another 48 to 72 hours until they are ready to be packaged here and transported to their final destination by truck. So let's go through with that criteria checklist and make sure everything's all right. Task achievement. So have I presented a clear overview of main trends, stages, or differences? In this particular case, we're interested in main stages. There are no trends, there are no differences. And yes, up here, clear overview. Have I mentioned all the elements? So in this case, the examiner will be checking, have you mentioned every step of the process? Have you mentioned every piece of equipment that's used, every other addition to the process like the sand and the water? All of those little elements need to be included in a process diagram, task 1. Presenting and highlighting each key feature. This is sort of related to mentioning all elements when it comes to a process diagram. So the examiner is looking to make sure that you've described each step and that it makes sense, that you haven't just thrown words together and you haven't just put 5 bits of the step into one sentence. So you need to describe it as if you were describing it to a child or as if you're describing it to somebody who can't see the picture. That will be a good scoring task 1. Now, as I said, data is not relevant here, so we'll skip that, but reporting accurately is important. So you do need to make sure that your steps are in the right order, that you haven't described something which isn't there or misrepresented something that is there. Coherence and cohesion. It's organised logically as always, and I've used paragraphs as we always do. In this type of task, you're going to use a lot more sequencing language, things like followed by, before, after, once, just like this. So we've got beginning with, finishing with, first of all, then, either, or, once, before, firstly, and then eventually, until. So sequencing language and passive voice, those are two features of a process diagram task 1. Lexical resource, have we demonstrated a range of vocabulary? Even though there's a lot of vocab in the process diagram, yes, you can use that, but you also need to embellish, as I said before. You need to bring in your own vocabulary. In this case, things like this: construction industry, brick making process, extraction, raw material, machine, metal grid, sift, large chunks, pure, mixture, rectangular mold, achieve the final shape. So you can see that I've taken language from the diagram, for example, mold, but I've also added language around it. Rectangular mold, achieve the final shape, formed. Besides the range, we also need to be careful with precision and spelling. Make sure it's the right word form and that your spelling is correct. Grammatical range and accuracy. So to demonstrate a wide range of structures, as I mentioned, passive voice is going to feature heavily in your task 1 diagram. So here are some examples. Is dug, is put, are added, is cut, have been formed. And notice that I'm mainly using present tense or present perfect, like have been formed. Are sent, present tense, are heated, are moved, ready to be packaged and transported. A lot of passive voice. We've also got some participle clauses, beginning with, finishing with, using a machine. And subordination, which is also a complex sentence, once, until. Subordination or subordinating conjunctions like this, once and until. The added benefit of these, they are also complex sentences, which is the next checkpoint for me. And they're also noun phrases. Things like this: the construction industry, the extraction of raw material, the delivery of the finished bricks, final destination. Complex structures, so here are two of them, once and until. Another one up here, these are relative clauses. So a clay is dug from the ground using a machine known as a digger, reduced relative clause. The full relative clause here is a machine which is known as a digger, and it is then put through a metal grid which sifts the large chunks from the pure clay. So relative clauses, subordinate clauses, they create complex sentences, an important part of your score. Accuracy and precision of punctuation, all good there. So on test day, in that final couple of minutes, you need to check your work. So mentally run through the checklist. You're probably going to prioritize checking your grammar at this stage, particularly check your passive voice. Are your verbs correct? Are your past participles correct? But then do check everything else. Have you got the overview? Have you demonstrated range? Is your vocab and grammar precise as well? Let's review that method finally. So analyze and plan for about 3 minutes. Look carefully at the process, draw on it if you want. Make sure you don't miss any important part. Write by following the structure and keep the criteria in your mind. 15 minutes for that. And 2 minutes, check carefully. Over to you. Go and have a go at writing a task 1 process diagram.